Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Alex Sabio here. I live in Southern California, invest in short-term rentals and hotels. I help healthcare professionals invest in real estate. Really excited to have Noble here, and he's got a really sneaky way of making money with government contracts. Before we get into that, we'll have Savannah jump on in here.
Hey everyone, I'm Savannah. I'm a registered nurse. I've been working as a nurse for over 10 years. Started investing in real estate in 2020. Started with single family homes and then switched into multifamily. And now I primarily help other healthcare professionals learn how to passively invest in real estate through syndications. If you're interested in learning more about that stuff, I just released a book called Passive Profits, and it shows high level everything that you need to know about how to passively invest in real estate syndication. So happy to be here. I'm really excited to hear from Noble about this strategy in short-term rental contracts. A lot of interest here. So Noble, go ahead and I'm going to kick it over to you.
All right. Awesome. First of all, Alex, man, Savannah, I appreciate y'all having me. Fun fact, I actually have the flu right now. So I have been under the weather for the past day or two, but I got my Gatorade for hydration. I got my Kleenexes. So if I have to go on mute for anything, you'll know why. But other than that, yeah, I am super happy to be here. So before I get to that, let me ask you guys, if you've heard me speak before, just raise your hand and let me know if you, okay. Well, a couple of people, all right. Good deal. So like Alex was saying, we have a very unique way of going about leveraging short-term, mid-term rentals for long-term cash flow. So I know for a lot of people, regulations can be an issue or are an issue. Occupancy rates, you hit that seasonality, and you get concerned in the down season or going into the down season, how occupied your property is going to be. We had a good fortune. We don't worry about any of that stuff with this. For those of you who don't know, that's me. If you want to follow me on IG, it's my IG handle right there. It's my family. It's why I actually got into the space, actually. So it's my wife in the top left, and then my oldest in the essentials hoodie, and then my middle child down at the bottom with the red lanyard, and then my youngest in the football player on the right. So 3 boys. So super proud of them. So let me give you a little bit of history, a little bit of context about myself. So I actually have a hospitality background. A lot of people don't realize that, but I'm dating myself a little bit, but I cut my teeth on the hotel space back in the 90s. All of those brands on there, I work for all of those brands at some time or another. And I did do some regular like front desk stuff, night audit, stuff like that. But the overwhelming majority of my time that I was in the space was spent on the event and conference services side. So I was that guy. I was part of the AV crew, the audio visual crew. And I ranked up in the industry and ended up being a technology director position where I oversaw teams and crews and stuff like that. And we did some pretty epic events. Some of them were in hotels, some of them were even in convention centers and arenas. So I've done everything from 10-person conference room things all the way up to 30, 40,000 crowd arenas where I'm overseeing all of the technology that's going on during a concert or something. So that's my background, but I started in the hotels. So when I got out of the hotels, and I was even doing event production before the hotels, let me say that. So I was doing event production before the hotels, then I did hotel stuff. And then I got out of hotels, I went into home theater. And I did that for a minute, and that was cool because I got to design like home theater systems, whole house audio lighting, video displays, all of that fun stuff that people like to have, media rooms, all of that. So then I left that, and this is where the story begins to get super important. So I left that, and I went into the commercial side of that space. So I wasn't doing residential home theater, then I was doing commercial audio-visual design. So I was still dealing with audio and lighting and control systems and video and all of that stuff, but I was doing it for larger projects. Started out as a design, a sales engineer, then I got into strictly sales. But this is where it's interesting because when I was in that space, there was a couple of like different sectors or verticals that I was responsible for. It just happened to be corporate, it was higher education, it was healthcare, it was military and federal government. And there's a little bit of house of worship. So those are my core verticals as a salesperson that I was responsible for. So fast forward, 2008, wife gets sick and she gets diagnosed with a brain tumor. So I had to hit the pause button at work. She had to go in and get surgery, all of that stuff to get the tumor removed. Long story short, they were able to take it out. So what should have been like a 6-hour surgery ended up going like 14 hours. So hours later, 2 blood transfusions later, they ended up getting it all out. It was all good. She's in the ICU. And in the second day of the ICU, she flatlines. Not once, but twice. And it turns out she's allergic to morphine. And they had her on a morphine drip. So it was killing her organs from the inside out. But they were able to resuscitate her, and she is fine and healthy today. But that was a defining moment. Shortly on the heels of that, I got called back. So once she was released from the hospital, I had to decide, hey, I'm going to stay home and take care of her, or I'm going to go back to work. So I said, I'm gonna stay home and take care of my wife. So 6 to 8 weeks later, she fully rehabbed and everything. Cause brain surgery, you guys know, I'm sure, so it's pretty major. She had to learn how to redo some things. So back in the office, I get called in for a sales meeting. And then I just get berated by the CEO for my dismal sales numbers. And that was despite the fact that I had been out for 6 weeks or so, helping my wife get back on her feet. And so I decided in that moment, like, I'm getting out of here. Like, I'm not going to find myself in a position again where I'm beholden to someone else's time. I want to buy my time back. And then I ended up doing just that. And so I put my head down, went to work, was still at the W-2. And in 2013, I cashed out. I hit a couple of big, huge multi-7-figure projects, and I was in commission sales at the time. And I cashed out. I was like, peace, right? So I left. And on the heels of that, 2014, I started a marketing agency. I always wanted to run a marketing agency. I've been following HubSpot for years. This is in their early days. And I was like, I want to do that. So then I transitioned to marketing agency, and I did it in the same field, which was the technology space. That's what I had been selling in the previous W-2. And so that took off. So it's up and running. I fell in love with this thing called monthly recurring revenue. And so as I would stack clients, that monthly recurring revenue would increase. So I was like, oh, this is super clutch right here. So I love this model. But what I found was I was actually working more as an entrepreneur than I was in my previous W-2, where I had been working 60 hours a week. And so I'm like, okay, something's not right, because I left that so I had more time to be with my family and stuff. And so in 2017, I was introduced to short-term rentals. And I said, wait a second, you mean I can make monthly revenue as much or more than I'm making now? And I could do it potentially working less? And so I was like, say less. So dove into that. Of course, fast forward, 2020 hits, all of that good stuff. Y'all already know the story. Here's the kicker though. Before COVID, I had already started implementing direct bookings. This is before it became a thing. MTR wasn't even a thing. It wasn't even a buzzword, right? I had already started implementing direct bookings. Industries are what had I started implementing on those in, right? The same ones that I was doing in my previous W-2 job. Corporate, healthcare, higher education. I dipped my toe into military. So I had already started implementing that. Partially because Airbnb screwed me one time out of a whole bunch of money and frustrated me. And so that's why I got into it. But nevertheless, going into COVID, we had already put that into play. Okay. And so while everybody's business was just getting impacted, people were shutting their doors, this, that, and the other, we literally, during COVID, we lost 5 bookings, 3 Airbnb bookings, 2 VRBO bookings. That is it. Because we had established so much direct booking business going into that. Okay. Now, during COVID, one of the things that we doubled down on that was a game changer for us was higher education. I'll get to that in a minute. But if y'all remember during COVID, at some point, the universities and colleges started shutting down. And so when they started shutting down, they were kicking the kids out of the dorm rooms, the whole 9 yards, right? We had properties that were near colleges and universities. What happened was, though, is that there were international students staying on campus that then they shut the airports down. They couldn't fly back home. So they were stuck and they had no place to go. So we raised our hand. We said, hey, we want to house those students. So we had 3 and 4 bedroom condos at the time, townhomes at the time, where we were renting by the entire unit. So then we broke those down into renting them by the door. And what we found was our sweet spot in that area just happened to be international Asian females for whatever reason. That's just what flocked to us, right? When we put it out there. And then they had friends. So we ended up hosting a lot of them over the course of that time during the beginning of COVID. And that's where really when our direct bookings just went to a whole nother level. And so we doubled down on that model. After COVID, 2021, we were over 60%. Today, we're over 95% direct bookings. So of all of our doors, we only have 3 left on the OTAs. And those are left on there intentionally because they're by the Cowboys Stadium and they just stay booked. And that's it. Everything else of the 44 doors is all direct. Okay. So that's my story. Here's a couple of unit shots of just some properties.
That's impressive, Noble, though. I get like maybe less than 5% direct bookings and I'm frustrated with it, but I definitely need to move that number up.
Yeah. It was a bit of a process, but let's get into the meat of it. So before I get into the government stuff, let me just say that, because I also wanted to mention some of the hotel stuff too. So those are going to overlap a little bit, but we play in a bunch of different verticals, which I'll walk you through. These are some of the main ones we play in, right? So corporate, higher education, healthcare, relocation, insurance, disaster recovery, aviation, military, and federal government, right? So those are some of the main ones that we play in. But why we like the government space so much is because it's very much to us like a blue ocean strategy. So what do we mean? Unlike a traditional like Airbnb host that is hosting transit guests, those guests that are coming in 2 and 3 and 4 nights a week or 2 or whatever, where everybody is competing for that same type of guest. In this business model, we're not competing for that same type of guest. In the traditional Airbnb space, even to some extent, some of the NCR spaces, although the guests that everybody's competing for, it's like meat and it's like bloody meat in the water. And all the sharks are going after the same types of people. It creates a very red, bloody ocean. The space that we play in, one, there's just so much available there. A few people are even aware of it. And then those that are, like, there's just so much coming down the pipe. It's very much a blue ocean. And so we're not competing with other operators. We just aren't, right? Those that are aware of it and that are in the space, there's way too much opportunity for 100 companies to go after. There's just a lot. And I'll explain that in a little while. So we like the fact that it's very much a blue ocean strategy. We don't deal with regulations and ordinances. We don't worry about Airbnb changing their algorithm during their winter or spring update and all of that nonsense. We're not competing with the other operators for those guests. Seasonality, we don't care. It's not a big thing. And then, of course, we're not having to worry. We can run ads, but we haven't had to, and we don't have any intention to. And nothing against that, but we just don't have to worry about it. So that's a plus. So again, the top 7 that we go after, I'm gonna stick with the primarily for the government stuff for this particular conversation. Let me give you guys a case. Let me actually a couple of them because I think it'll paint the picture for you. So our very first government contract opportunity. Mind you, my previous W-2 job, one of the verticals that I was responsible for was the federal and military vertical. And part of my responsibility at the time, I was working for a very new company. It was less than 2 years old, more like a startup technology company. One of my responsibilities was to go out and position us to go after contract-based work with the federal government. So that's how I cut my teeth on it. A lot of people ask, how do you know this stuff? That's how I know from previous experience with my W-2. So a couple of years into this STR business, I had this light bulb moment. I'm like, wait a second, why am I not doing this same thing that I was doing previously in my W-2, but for this business? Because it's just a different product or service. That's all. The process is the same to go after a contract. It's just the service is different. Well, the STRs. So originally I said, okay, I want to do this I'll see what I can find in this space. And so I went out and found a company that was holding a DOD contract, a Department of Defense contract. Okay. And so when a company has a contract direct with a federal agency, it's called a prime contract. There are different types of contracts, but when your entity has a contract directly with a federal agency, it's called the prime contract. So I found a DOD, a Department of Defense contractor that was responsible for the training of pilots, military pilot, helicopter pilots, and mechanics. So these pilots and mechanics would fly to this area and they would complete their training recertification and head back home. And this was throughout the year. The mechanics would come in 2-week intervals and the pilots would come in 30-day intervals around the clock. So we found this company that was holding this contract. Under this DOD contract, there's a lot of moving parts, So this is a huge contract, right? It's a hundreds and hundreds of $1 million contract. One of the components necessary for this contract was to house these people as they came into town for the training. And so we identified that and we said, hey, we want to get on that list of accommodations providers because they were using hotels and they still do, but they were using Holiday Inn Express, Fairfield Inn, limited stay properties. So we said, hey, we want to be on that list. And so we went to them, long story short, showed them what we have to offer in comparison to a hotel room. So it was game on once they figured out, hey, this is a much better product, right? A fully finished, fully outfitted STR is much better than a 300 square foot hotel room, like hands down every day of the week. And so we were able to get on that list. Now, here's the beautiful thing. When the government has a need for lodging and accommodations, housing, typically that falls under what's called a GSA rate, okay? A GSA rate is a Government Services Administration rate. It's a lodging per diem. Now that rate can vary depending on your region or zip code or city or whatever. But for the example's sake, for ours in Dallas-Fort Worth area at the time, it was $167 a night. So basically that means that GSA rate, the government won't pay over that rate, but that rate or less, they'll pay that. Okay, so $167 a night. So if you do the math with me, here's how it looks. The pilots were coming in 30-day intervals. Okay, so that because they were coming in 30-day intervals, in and out every 30 days, we said, hey, we want to put these pilots in 1-bedroom units. Okay, because they're going to be there longer, they need more space. So we were able to charge $167 a night times 30 nights. That's $5,010 a month on a 1-bedroom apartment. This is very much an arbitrage play, by the way. We're leasing this multifamily inventory, marking it up, and then selling it back to the government, essentially. Okay, and so $5,010 a month on a 1-bedroom. Well, our rent was only like $1,485, and then a couple $100 in expenses. We're keeping a spread, nice spread for a 1-bedroom. And we had 5 of those, so we did that for the pilots. So that was $25K a month. That was gross. And so we did that $25K a month on the 1-bedroom. Now here's the beautiful thing: the mechanics were coming in 2-week intervals. All right, they didn't have to be there as long. They're coming in 2-week intervals, month in, month out. So we said because the mechanics are coming in 2-week intervals, they're going to be there less time. We're going to put them in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. Okay. And here's the thing: because there was a second bath, even though they had a shared living and a shared kitchen, we were able to charge that GSA rate not once, but twice, one for each individual. So then that $167 a night went from $5,010 a month to $10,020 a month. And we have 4 of those. So if you're doing the math with me, this is what it looks like, right? So 1 night GSA rate, two mechanics in there at the same time, $10,020 a month. That 2-bedroom rent was like right at $2,000 a month, couple $100 expenses, huge spread. So between the 1-bedrooms and the 2-bedrooms, 9 doors grossing $65K a month. And this is not uncommon. This is one example. I'm gonna give y'all another one. So at that point, we were like, this is insane. And here's the beautiful thing: this is a 5-year contract. So this is not like a one and done. This is month after month after month over a 5-year period. The thing I like to say is like these with the federal government, it's like the gift that keeps on giving and giving. You only have to do the legwork one time to get the contract, and then it just keeps paying out. So we said, hey, this is super dope. Like, we want to run this play again. So we doubled down on the exact same strategy. We found another DOD contractor. It was in far north Dallas. And we said, we're going to do the same thing with that one. But this time, instead, we did was we went and got the contract first. We went and got the contract first, and then we leveraged the contract to go get the doors to support it. That right there, that's a different conversation. A lot of people that do arbitrage, they come in, whatever their script is telling them to say, they're basically saying, hey, can I Airbnb your property? In which case, most places are like, no. Our conversation is completely different. So we basically are going and saying, we holding a guaranteed federal government contract. We want to partner with you guys in this endeavor to provide housing for these military service members and so on and so forth. Are you guys interested, or should we go next door to your competitor? Completely different conversation. That's why we love this business model. One, it's easy to forecast because before even the ink is wet on the contract, you already know what your expenses are. You already know what you're charging, what you're marking up and charging to the government. You already know what your profit margin is. It's predictable revenue. It's guaranteed revenue. It's guaranteed to the extent that even if the federal government shuts down, that's the conversation of late over the past couple of years. Federal government might shut down, this or that, right? If the federal government shuts down, guess what keeps going? Federal contracts keep getting paid out. So it's virtually recession proof. For all these reasons, this is why we love this strategy. And then over the long term, like they're going to generate you significantly more revenue than most MTR strategies because you can stay occupied, 100% occupancy. So what are some of the things that you need to have in place in order to go after these opportunities? So before I jump into that, does anybody have any quick questions that I can answer?
No, but I just want to give you a standing ovation because this is absolutely brilliant. And I'm just laughing the whole time because I'm like, this dude's a freaking genius here, man. And he's generating so much income. So kudos to you, man.
No, I appreciate it.
The question here, do you need a real estate license to negotiate these transactions for government contracts?
Not at all. Not at all. You do not. That's a great question. So no, you don't. As a matter of fact, not only do you not need one, just as I described, you don't even need to own the property. I'm going to walk you guys through an example real quick. Being in a situation where you don't even have to furnish. Because the example I gave, we're furnishing those units, but you don't necessarily have to furnish. So good question, Vanessa. I'm going to get to that for getting started. So real quick, I'm going to run through this other case study real quick. So some of you, to date, I'm not a big social media guy. I post sometimes on IG and stuff, but I don't post as much as I should. So I did post, 5 or 6 months ago about a student who won a $7.5 million contract. What you don't see is other things, other contract wins that I haven't posted about, nor have I spoken about. But this particular one that I had posted about previously, it was an opportunity through Department of Justice. So Department of Justice were looking for some doors in Alabama. Now, this operator, he doesn't live in Alabama. He lives in North Carolina. He has some ST units in San Antonio, Texas. But this opportunity was in Alabama. And so Department of Justice was looking for multiple doors for a training for ATF. ATF's coming in on a rotation again. They're doing weapons training as people were coming in. And so they said, hey, we need people to provide inventory, housing inventory, lodging inventory for us in 50 door increments. That's not a small number, okay? And so again, this was more of an arbitrage play here because of the number of doors. So I walked my student through this process. And so what we did was we said, hey, they were specifically asking for hotels, which is common because they don't know what they don't know. So what we did was I said, hey, we're going to pitch them. We're going to give them a hotel pitch, but we're going to pitch them fully furnished apartment units because it's just better. And I knew that because of my contract. And we put together a proposal, submitted it. They loved it. They were like, this is super dope. We've never seen this before. And we're very much interested to the extent that he not only won that contract, he was able to partner with a multifamily developer that was developing a new community of apartments, and he locked up 50 of those doors. Because what's important to new development is a lease up, right? So during the phases of the inventory are completed, it's important for them to lease up that asset as quickly as possible. They want to get to the 95% occupancy level as fast as possible. So this was new construction. So for him to come in and say, hey, we'll take 50 doors off the bat. Our client is the U.S. federal government. It's guaranteed revenue. It's 5 years. That's a no-brainer conversation. It's not a yes or no conversation. It's a how quickly, how soon, yes. So he was able to lock that up. But we said, hey, in the event, because we weren't sure they were going to take the apartments or not. I suspected that they would, but we weren't 100% sure. We said, in the event that they don't, we want to provide an option for them to take hotels. So I taught my student the strategy, hotel brokering. And so basically what he was able to do, we said, we're going to identify some hotel properties that were in this 10-mile radius of this military base, because they said the properties had to be in a 10-mile radius. So we're going to identify some hotel properties, and then we're going to go up and we're going to lock those rooms up. So we're going to lock up the room block, and then we're going to resell that room block back to the government. So he was able to negotiate with 2 hotels, 2 Marriotts actually, a Courtyard Marriott and a Fairfield Inn Marriott, locked both of those up. And the government said, we'll take not only the 50-door apartments, but the additional 100 units from the 2 hotel properties that you locked up, and 150 units, $7.5 million. And of that 150 units that he locked up, the government to date, I think, is only using 90 of those units, and they keep adding incrementally as they go. And he'll already, just on those 90, he'll already surpass 7.5. Right? So as he gets to the 150 mark, that contract is likely to be closer to 10. So it's ridiculous. So there's an example, like some of the opportunities available in space. And this is one operator. He had an assistant, a couple of VAs. He's like us. He don't have this super large team. And so this particular deal for the 50 apartment units, you were like, how do you furnish 50 apartments? Well, he did it, right? He partnered with a rental company, and they came in, they provide everything down to the forks and the glassware and all that good stuff. And they had their team furnish all 50 doors in record time, much faster than he could have done it. And he baked that price for that rental furniture into his quote that he was pitching to the government. So he already knew what his margin was going to be. So his margin is stupid on the apartment units. On the hotel side, the margin isn't there because he's paying the hotel nightly, unlike the apartments, and he's charging the government nightly. However, even though the margins are smaller, he's not handling check-in and check-out. He's not handling housekeeping and cleaning. He's not handling maintenance. He's not handling continental breakfast and shuttle service and none of that stuff. He's doing two things. He's invoicing the government once a month and he's paying the hotel once a month. And he's keeping that spread. Easy money, right? Anybody could do it, okay? So those are just some of the things that are possible when you're dealing with the federal government contract space. So how do you find out what states need assistance in government contract space? So good question. So the short of it is, guys, like these opportunities, literally, you would be surprised, they're everywhere. Had a student at the end of December win a contract through the VA. It was at Iowa. It was an Iowa contract. It was only 9 doors. It was $5.4 million. These things are everywhere, okay? So there's some hot markets. Alabama's a hot market right now. Washington, D.C. always. Florida, usually very steady. Flip to the left coast from San Diego, going up to Seattle, right? Opportunity. So there's some hot markets, but I wouldn't really say, hey, I need to be in this specific market, because the reality is when the government says, hey, we have a need, when an agency says we have a need, it could be anywhere in the country at any given time. And it's usually multiple doors. Sometimes you can find those opportunities that are one-off, single opportunities where, hey, I got a property, this will work good for it, let me go after it. But more often than not, the government needs multiple of something when they're ordering something. If you're interested, there's some prerequisites you need to get out the way. If you're interested in this business model and you want to pursue it, there's some things you need to do on the front end before you do the most important thing, which is setting up your entity as a vendor with the federal government, becoming a vendor with the federal government. You can't get around that. You need to very much do that. But before you set your entity up as a vendor with the federal government, there's some things you need to keep in mind. So all of these things are very important. If you're starting a new entity, you need to name your company. Just keep in mind, like, some company names you probably don't want to use. Here's a list of some of those. And that's not so much because you can't do business with the federal government using those names. That's because later on down the road, if you want to get like bank lines of credit and things like that, then the name it could present more challenges for you. So when banks are offering lines of credit and things like that, especially gets some larger lines of credit, they'll categorize your business. And a lot of times that's done at the name level and they'll associate it with a certain industry, and it could present a challenge for you getting the maximum line of credit. So for that reason, more so, I say just be conscious of the name. Now, if you have a company that has one of these names in the company and that company is a year old or more, then go ahead and keep it and use it. I wouldn't say start from scratch, but just something to keep in mind when you're thinking of a name. This is probably the single most important thing. If you don't get anything else out of this call, this is probably one of the most important. I see more people get hung up on this than anything else when it comes to registering their entity to do business at the federal level. So here's one thing. The government does not want to see a P.O. box attached to your entity. That's not a legit business to them. They would much rather not see a home address. In some instances, maybe you can get away with it. What we're talking about, no. I always recommend, because what the government wants to see is a legitimate business address. They want to see that you're parked somewhere that has a freestanding office building, has a suite number attached to it, something like that. For most of us, what that looks like is using a service. So I typically recommend like an Opus or a Regis or a Da Vinci or something like that. And here's the thing. You want to use a type of service. Not only can you have mail delivered there, for one, for your entity, but you want to use a type of service where like maybe once a month you get access to the conference room, or there's an office suite space or some working area or something like that you get access to. Pre-COVID, it was not uncommon for some agencies to come out to your location and sit down with you in your office. They don't do that so much anymore because of COVID, but that was very much the thing. It could happen, less likely nowadays, but for that reason and many others, you want to have a legit business address. So what happens is people will use an address that's like a UPS postal box, or they'll use a virtual address that like through IP or something like that, but it's not necessarily attached to a building that has office suite space in it. And so what'll happen is they'll set up their company, they'll use one of those addresses, they'll go through the registration process with the federal government, and it'll get flagged. And they'll say, this is not a legitimate business address. And that pauses the whole process, and it could delay you for weeks up to months. I've seen it happen way too many times. So this is the number one thing that you need to get right if you want to do business with the federal government. And if you need to change your address, no problem, because a lot of people have to do that. Just use a service like an Opus or Regis or something like that. And then if you need to change your address, you need to update it with your state. So Secretary of State or whatever state office that you registered your entity in, and then with the IRS. Those are two primary places you need to update your address if you need to update it so that you can become a federal vendor. if you have your address needs to match for both of those locations, but if you have your address matching, you're good to go there. That's going to solve 75% of any hangups or delays that you would experience registering as a federal vendor. Phone number, that's the next thing. Like, the government doesn't want to see a mobile phone number. No Google Voice numbers. Home lines aren't really much a thing anymore. They want to see a legit business line. So legit business line typically is going to be like something that is more like PBX based. So dial 1 for sales, 2 for service, that sort of thing. Now, you don't have to set up those extensions, but that's the type of line that they are looking to see. So that typically, again, is through a service like a Grasshopper, Ring Central, Dial Pad, something like that. So if you're using one of those services, great. Now, let's say you have a mobile number already attached to your business. No problem. These services will allow you to do what's called porting, number porting, P-O-R-T. So you can port your existing number over to a service and it gives it that business legitimacy that you need. So that's important because the government doesn't like those other types of numbers. Your business URL. So not a big deal there. If you have a URL already, it's existing, great, good deal. You can go ahead and use it. If you don't, you need to set something up. The .com is always preferable. It's just the oldest, most known thing. It's more of a social proof type of thing. But in either case, you'll want to make sure you have a URL. You don't need a fully built website, but you want to make sure you at least have the URL locked down. And then you'll want to have a matching professional email account. So no Gmails, Yahoos, anything like that. So whatever your URL is, .com, you want to have like info@xyz.com as your professional business email account. Yes, because again, the government wants to do business with professional companies. They don't want to fly by night, mom and pop operation, anything like that. So you need to set yourself up as such. So that's why this is important. Social media is not as big a deal. However, I will say you definitely want to bone up your LinkedIn account because inevitably at some point or another, agencies will search your company and they will search you online. And the number one places they search is through search engines and LinkedIn. Okay. So you'll want to at least have your LinkedIn information up to date. So if you're going to be basically the service you're reselling to the government is going to be housing, lodging, accommodation, stuff like that, then you'll want to put your existing company or whatever company you're starting on your LinkedIn profile so they can see, hey, this person is doing what they are selling us. Like they're actually doing this, right? And then you'll want to also then turn around for that entity and create a company page. So you can only do that with a personal LinkedIn account. So you need to get your personal LinkedIn account set up first and then take that and create a company page for that account and then put some relevant information on that company page, relevant posts, articles, whatever. Just again, social proof, because again, government agencies, they want to do business with legit companies. So you want to come across as such. Facebook, not nearly as important. You can't use it. Instagram, not nearly as important, but you can't use it. Okay. After you've done that stuff, then you want to go out and you want to go to this website. It's listyourself.net. And essentially it's like from Date Myself again, but it's like an online directory, right? So it's like the yellow pages, the phone book of the internet. But basically what it does is it takes all that company information we just talked about and it pushes it out to all the search engines. Now, people don't realize there's over 100 search engines. We only hear about Google, Bing, those guys. There's over 100. So this site takes that business information and pushes it out to all the search engines so that over time, their algorithms pick it up and you become searchable. Because the number one thing that's going to happen in this business is they're going to Google your company, yourself, both, something along those lines. You want to have your company information showing up where it needs to be. So that's usually the last step. Then after you do that, now you're ready to register to become a vendor with the federal government. What you would do is SAM.gov. That's the System for Award Management. That's the process you would go through, fill out the application online. During that process, you'll get assigned what's called a UEI, a unique entity identifier that identifies your specific entity amongst all the others in their federal database. And you'll also be assigned what's called a cage code. That is supplied through DOD, Department of Defense. Everyone gets a cage code number, but you get that on the tail end of your registration as you're wrapping up. And once you have those two numbers, your UEI and your cage code, you're ready to rock and roll. Then all those opportunities I just discussed earlier, those examples, those become available for you to go after, those 5, 6, 7 figure opportunities. So that's the short, kind of the quick version of how you would go through that process. Now, if you haven't done it before, of course, the U.S. federal government, they don't make anything easy. It's like dealing with the IRS. Sometimes it's like hectic. It could be a process. Now, the thing I like to tell people is, yes, it could be a daunting process, but you only got to go through it one time. You only got to go through it once. And so might as well just get it out the way because then all of these opportunities become available to you. But if it's your first time going through it, I would recommend getting some help. There's an organization, it's called Apex. And Apex Accelerator officers are basically federal employees that are put into place to help small business owners navigate this registration process to become a vendor with the federal government. And their service is free. So that's the great thing. So they do this stuff 5 days out of the week. And so typically you can Google it, Apex Accelerator, and whatever your city is. They usually have offices in most of the cities around the country or one nearby. Usually you set up a discovery call with them. They'll glean some information about your company and what services or products you're looking to resell to the government. And they'll help guide you through that registration process through SAM. So it's more efficient, less cumbersome. You can get it done a lot quicker. So I would recommend leveraging that. And then they can also help you if you qualify for any of these socioeconomic certifications, they can help you get certified for those too. So if you're a minority or woman owned, they can help you with that. If you're a disadvantaged business enterprise veteran, so on and so forth. So Apex Accelerator can be a very good contact to reach in your market. So yeah, I know we're probably running up against the time clock here. I'll probably go ahead and take some questions from you guys, but that's where we're at.
Really impressive, Noble. Makes me want to sell all the stuff I have, and you're doing, man, because it's pretty impressive. The question that I think a lot of us will have is when getting these arbitrage units or purchasing homes to try to rent out for government contracts, do we need to be in like ideal locations close to some like a military base, airport, or what's your take on this?
Yeah, good question. So here's what I always tell my students. The first example I gave, like we had those units already. It just so happened that I found an opportunity that was in our backyard that I was able to leverage some existing units for with a 9-door deal. The second opportunity, although it was still in my backyard, I didn't have the units. I teach my students is to chase the opportunity and not so much to try to match an opportunity to your specific location. You can sometimes, but the reality is there's over 400 federal agencies. There's a lot, and you never know where they're going to have a need. There's just too many of them, and there's too much stuff coming down the pipe. And so it makes more sense to try to go after the opportunity, land the opportunity, and then go get the doors to support it. And I think what people will find in this space is they legit, like they pop up everywhere. Some of them are, I'll use one example, like FEMA, for example. Some opportunities are driven by natural disasters, whether it's wildfire, whether it's earthquake, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's tornadoes. Some of them are driven by natural disasters. You don't know, like hurricane season every year. Florida, Louisiana, coastal areas are likely to probably get hit. So they have recurring needs. But outside of that, in wildfires and stuff, like you don't know specifically where opportunity is going to pop up. And that's one agency, FEMA, out of the 400 plus that exists. And it's different agencies have different needs and varying degrees. And so once you're registered, it makes more sense to really start looking at the vast number of opportunities and try to narrow those down to the ones that are of interest to you and pursue those.
Design element, are we having to do anything special to any of these homes? Like I know in the STR space, we're having to make it Instagrammable and hire like the interior designers. Are you just making it basic just for people to stay in?
Yeah, good question. So we don't have to design to the standard that we would for a traditional like STR. It's just not necessary because typically these people are staying anywhere from a couple of weeks on rotation to a couple of months. And what the industry is used to, the federal industry is used to, are hotels. Think about that a little bit. Aside from getting a suite or something or in a hotel, like the rooms are pretty basic from a design aesthetic standpoint. So that's your comp set right there, is what does a hotel room look like? Now, we go a little bit above that because we want our stuff to stand out. As people are, like in the instance I was giving you about the 9 doors, so those pilots and mechanics, they're choosing from a list. For that specific opportunity, they get to choose where they want to stay. We're on a list of about 9 other hotels, and we're the only SDR company on that list. So when they're looking and they're looking at options and they see what we're offering compared to a traditional Holiday Inn Express, it's a no-brainer. So we do step it up a notch, but it's not to the extent that we would normally do with typical STRs.
Vanessa's asking about damages, potential damages where someone comes in. Is the government liable or do we go ask the guest? What's going on there?
Yeah, good question. So the short answer is it depends. More often than not, you're still going to carry some level of insurance, right? You're still going to carry some level of insurance. Some contracts can get specific to the point to where they say the government is not going to carry insurance on this, but if there's damage, we'll cut a check for it for a reasonable amount. And then some contracts will say we're fully responsible for damage. So it could be yes, no, everything in between. At the end of the day, you still want to have your own policy, even if it's a group policy to some extent to cover those minor damages and stuff. Make sense?
Yeah, Benji has a question here. Is 5 years the average contract or do they have something smaller like a 1 to 3 year contract?
Yeah, so basically the way it works is the initial contract for most of the housing stuff, right? Most of the houses, I'll say about 90%. The initial contract is 1 year. And what happens is there's a 4-year auto renewal, typically 4 years, sometimes 5, but there's a multi-year auto renewal attached to it. So unless you just have an epic failure during your first year, that renewal typically kicks in and then it goes from a single year to a multi. There's a base year, which is the first year. And then there's an auto renewal that kicks in, which is usually a multiple of that after that. So 5 and 6 years is very common, very common.
I'm assuming that you have like very little to zero risk of squatters, right? I think that's what a lot of us have issues with when it comes to long-term rental and sometimes midterm rental. I've heard of some horror stories, but these are people coming to work, right?
100%, 100%. So you're not going to find yourself in a squatter situation, partially because these opportunities are coming through federal agencies. It could be any federal agency, but because they're coming through federal agencies, some of these opportunities, the government is paying you directly. So the example I gave with the 9 doors, that was a little different because the individual guests are swiping for their stay and they can get reimbursed as long as it doesn't exceed that GSA rate. But some opportunities, the agency is paying you directly. And with those situations, like there is no extending of stays. People are there, they're there for a set amount of time and they're out, the next one comes in. And the government is paying you every month for that block of rooms. So yeah, no squatter stuff. And then the other thing I like too is these are federal employees, federal service members, federal contractors. These people are getting vetted at the highest level. So it's not like your traditional STR, even MTR guests. Like they're already like super qualified, highly vetted from a security background. So their security clearances a lot of time exceed civilians. So they just check all those boxes. You don't have to worry about that stuff.
Noble, another question that came in, what's the time frame between submitting a proposal and getting chosen? Also, are there certain items needed in a proposal that's helpful to be considered as a chosen vendor?
These contract opportunities, they vary widely in scale and scope and the number of doors. There's opportunities that any of us on this call could go after, but they're connected to maybe a 3-night hotel stay. Now, why would one want to pursue that? It's a 3-night hotel stay, but maybe the Army, and maybe they're having an event or a conference, and it's 300 people. And they're going to be in a hotel, using the conference room space, having food and beverage, traditional event planning type stuff. They'll put that out to bid, okay? So I help my students like go after those opportunities because there's lodging involved in it. And then they'll bring in an event planner to handle all the heavy lifting, right? Because that's what event planners do. Event planners know the language, know how to dialogue with the hotels, so on and so forth. I just happen to know that because I worked in hotels for a long time. But what that does is there's a ton of those. There's a ton of them. They're coming down all the time, all over the country. And you can make 5-10K on a weekend event just overseeing a conference where you're taking care of your entity has a contract with the hotel, and then you're basically reselling that contract to the government with a markup. Conversely, it could be something where there's a VA opportunity through the VA, and a VA has a need where they're housing. I've seen some where they're housing homeless VA, or even better yet, where they're housing VA folks who have had operations. So it's post-op stuff where they have to be nearby the VA hospital for 4 to 6 weeks or whatever after their operation, and they just cycle people through the properties. And these can be homes, they can be apartments, they can be whatever. And this goes on for sometimes those are like 8 to 10 year deals, so very long. Even longer than that, there's opportunities, and this really kicks it. If you're really interested in the real estate space, there's opportunities where the government wants to lease land. They want to lease commercial space. They want to buy assets. And some of those lease opportunities can be anywhere from 10 to 30 years. It's ridiculous. So I'm helping right now navigate through an opportunity. It's a 30-year lease opportunity. And the beautiful thing is, should they win it, they'll get a piece of that monthly payout every month for the next 30 years. It's ridiculous. So in terms of like time frame, as far as, hey, once the ink is wet on the contract and we're having a kickoff, it depends on what type of contract it is. It could be any one of those types of contracts and even more. And so that varies greatly. For given the examples I gave earlier, it could be a month, it could be 2 months. I've seen it as few as 2 weeks. So it really depends on the specific contract and that sort of thing. Are there certain items needed in a proposal that's helpful to be considered? Good question. So understand a couple things. Not every opportunity goes out to bid, because you would think like all of this stuff I've been talking about up to this point, you're competing. Not necessarily. Some opportunities, the agency will pick up the phone and call you directly and say, hey, we have an opportunity. It's for X number of doors. It's for how long can you support it? It's worth this amount. I've had that happen to 2 of my students. That's considered a non-biddable opportunity. In the industry term, it's called a sole source award. So a sole source award is when an agency is going to award a contract opportunity to a sole individual or entity. That's a sole source award. It's not going to go out to bid. They've simply identified that your company sells this product or service. We have a need for it in the markets that you service. Can you handle it? The other one is called a set-aside. A set-aside is an opportunity that those socioeconomic groups that I mentioned earlier qualify for. So if you're a woman-owned, if you're a minority-owned, disadvantaged business enterprise, veteran-owned, if you fall into one of those socioeconomic classifications, SBA certified, whatever, they will set aside opportunities specifically for those groups of folks that may not be biddable opportunities, where they just award them. So yes, there are some things that you can put in a proposal that can be advantageous, but understand that not everything is bid based. You're not always competing. You definitely will compete, but that's not always the case. But what are those things that you can put in a proposal? There's this thing called a capability statement. It's called CAPE statements. It's like a business resume. That's probably the number one marketing tool that you'll use in this space. It's usually a one-page PDF, color, printable, and it's like a business resume. Those typically you'll attach to every bid response, because those break down your company information, they break down your core competencies, they break down your differentiators, like your unique selling proposition, what sets you apart. So for those of us in this space, our comp set is hotels. So there's a lot of good things that set us apart. They list your what are called NAICS codes. So those are NAICS codes. Those are the codes. There's 6-digit codes that identify the industries that your entity services. So for people in the STR, MTR space, some examples would be like 721199, that's a code, 721110, 531110. Those are NAICS codes. So you would list your NAICS codes on there. There's probably 6 to 10 of them. Those identify the industries of the product or service that you're reselling to the government. So those will be on there. So there's things like that you'll also include in a proposal response that can be advantageous.
Hey, no, really, really good info there. Thank you so much for that. We're going to cut the meeting short here. I think we could go on because you're a wealth of knowledge here. And I always tell people it's like an onion. When you start peeling back the layers, there's so much more to this real estate game with short-term rentals, mid-term rentals, so on and so forth. Noble, how can people get a hold of you? Because you teach this as well, right?
Yeah, you want to flash that QR code up at the end. Anyone, is that the best way right there? So anyone.
Yeah, through here, this just has my socials and stuff and contact information. You can just grab it here, or you can hit me on Instagram. I'm always in my DMs on Instagram. So there's my IG, noble.crawford.3. Yeah, and if you're interested in learning more, I have some options available. And for you guys, being good friends with Alex and whatnot, I'll give you guys a killer deal. So yeah, just hit me up. I'm pretty easy to get at, and I answer my own DM. I'm not so big. I don't answer my own stuff. So yeah.
Hey, I'll have the replay up on Savannah's YouTube and my YouTube. I'll also share it with you, Noble, if you want to reuse it for your social media as well. With that said, we're going to end the meeting. Thank you so much, Noble, for joining us.
For having me. Appreciate it.
Have a great night, everyone.
See you, everybody. Thanks, Noble.